Hi, nice to have you on this How Do I video on Migrate from multiple companies to a multi-tenant architecture in Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. My name is Erik Wouters, I'm a Dynamics NAV MVP from Belgium and I'm creating this video in collaboration with Platan. At the end of this video, you will be able to migrate your own multi-company environment to a multi-tenancy environment and even understand what happened in the background. During this video, we will do a migration from a single tenant to a multi-tenant model. But first, we will explain you what the architectural difference is. We will not go too deep into the architectural difference, as that is not the objective of the video. We will do all this in 5 easy steps. As I explained, we will first give you a brief overview. And next we will do all the PowerShell steps, which is first preparing it, next splitting the database and the customer data, then we will prepare the NST for multi-tenancy, to conclude with moving the companies to its tenant. To explain you about the architecture, let me take you first to a very simple slide. People that are familiar with working with NAV in the past are most familiar with the single tenant model, because that's the model that we have been working for years. It's the model where we've got one database and everything is in that database. And I mean the application and the customer data. So like I said, it is the model with the one database. So if you go to the SQL Server Management Studio, we have one database in it. And in this database, we've got the application object and the company data. Now, when we go to NAV itself, we'll see that the connection to NAV is just connecting to an NST like we're just used to. And we get all the companies that is in that database. In my case, I've got 5 companies. And later in the script, you will see that I will move the companies that belong together, like the Contoso companies, to separate tenants. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going to split up the application from the company data. So in our case, we will create databases for Kronos, for Contoso, and for the default company. Now, when the databases are split up, the NAV server will regulate the communication between all those databases. Okay, enough about the architecture. Let's start migrating. As I said, the migration is done in PowerShell. Now, before we can use the scripts that were created for us and we can use the commandlets, we should prepare PowerShell for it. Now, I always use the ISE, and you should always run that as an administrator. Before I'm able to run any NAV commandlet, I have to do 2 things. First of all, I have to tell PowerShell that he's able to run scripts. We do that with this set execution policy commandlet. We tell it can be unrestricted. And we're also going to force to avoid the warning that we would get when running this commandlet. Next, we will import the nav admin tool module that is going to enable the NAV commandlets for us. So let us first run this. Now you'll see that you're going to have all the NAV commandlets available for you. Now let's split the application database and the customer data from each other. We are going to do this in 2 steps. First, we are going to export the NAV application by just providing the source database where it should be exported from and the destination database. And next, we are going to remove the NAV application from the original database. And we use the force parameter to avoid the warning before removing it. Now let's execute this. You see that it was executed successfully. It created a new database and I should be good to go. But let's first check this in SQL Server Management Studio. You see there is a new database here, which is my app database, which does not contain any customer data, just the app tables. And we've got our staging database, which does not contain the app tables anymore, only the tables that it really needs. That's it. That's all for splitting up the application database and the customer data. So what actually happened, we did the export of the application into a new database first, and we deleted the application database from the original database. So now let's change the NST for making it aware that it should behave like a multi-tenant server. Now, preparing the NST for multi-tenancy is being done in a few steps. First, I'm going to stop the nav server with the set nav server instance commandlet. Next, I have to change the configuration. Actually, just this custom settings file that is going to be changed. You can do that with PowerShell with the set nav server configuration. I'm going to change the multi-tenant key name to true, and I'm going to clear the database name key. Next, I'm going to start the server, and it's going to be started then in multi-tenancy mode. Now, every multi-tenancy server needs an application, and that is what I'm going to mount. And from then on, my server is prepared. So let's all do that in one script. Here you go. My server is now running in multi-tenancy mode. I can go and check the custom settings file and look for the multi-tenant. As you can see, it has been set to true. Now, what it did by mounting the application database, it filled in the application database name into the database name key. Now all is ready. We prepared our NST, the application is mounted. Now the NST is running in multi-tenant mode. Now it only needs tenants for me to be able to log into a company. So let's create our tenants and move our companies to it. So again, I'm going to use PowerShell for that. So I cleared my window again from the next piece. And I'm going to use a few steps. First of all, I'm going to mount a tenant. The tenant that I've actually created by exporting the application, removing in fact the application from the original database. I'm going to mount the tenant to the service instance. So as you can see, I give the tenant the default ID, and I'm going to attach the database, the staging, my original database from which the application was removed. And I'm going to override the tenant ID in the database. Basically just means that I'm going to save my information in the configuration. Next, I'm going to move my companies to different tenants. So I've got my default tenant, it's got 5 companies. Now I'm going to move companies to other tenants. And for this, I need a new script. A script that Microsoft has foreseen for us, which can be found on the DVD in the subfolder Windows PowerShell scripts. You have to import that, and then you'll have a few new commandlets. Next, we're going to move to companies by using the PowerShell piping. So we're going to combine a few commandlets to move the companies into the different tenants. Let's first do the first 2 steps. So I'm going to remove this script for a while, and I'm going to execute it. That's it. So now my tenant is mounted. I've got a default tenant, which means now actually I can connect to nav to a new tenant. You see now that NAV wants me to specify a tenant to connect to. Now I've got only one tenant with the ID default. So let's specify that. And here you can see all the 5 companies that are still in it. Now I don't want this. I want to move these companies. So let's first do that. You can see I'm using the get nav company command to get my companies out of the default tenant that I just mounted. But I don't want everything yet. I just want to move the Kronos companies to a different tenant. So I'm piping that command into the where object, and I'm going to filter my company name with the Kronos and asterisk. If we execute, for instance, this alone, you'll see I've got a company list with the Kronos distribution and the Kronos International. Now this is a good thing to work with, and I want to pipe this list into the new command that I just imported, which is the how to move company to tenant. So how does this how to move company tenant work? I specify the service where I want to move companies. I'm going to specify the database from where do I want to export the companies, and what is the old tenant name and the new tenant name. So I want to export the Kronos, the companies that I just filtered, into the new tenant Kronos. And when that was successful, let's remove all the companies that were moved. Next, I'm going to do quite the same for the Contoso companies. And you can guess it's going to move the Contoso companies to the new tenant, which I called Contoso. So if I execute this, you see that after a few minutes, the script is executed and we can check what happened in the background. Let's first check the default tenant that we opened earlier. So we connect to that default instance. You can see that it only has one company left. So the Contoso companies and Kronos companies are gone. That's exactly what we wanted. But of course, they have to be moved to another tenant. So let's connect to that tenant. You can see here the Kronos companies that I moved to the Kronos tenant. And the Contoso should be moved here. If I log in, you can see I can perfectly work. Also, what happened in the background is that databases should have been created. So let us check that. You see here that there is now a Contoso database and a Kronos database. And of course, my staging database is the default tenant. If you open this, you'll notice that only the default company tables are in, and the Contoso and the Kronos companies have been removed. Next, you'll see on the service folder that there is a new file filled, being the tenant's config file. If you open this, you'll find our settings that we have been doing with PowerShell. You find it here. Now that concludes the last step in the migration process from single to multi-tenancy. Now let me just explain what happened in the last step. We first mounted the default database, the database where we deleted the application from. We mounted that to the service. From then on, we had a multi-tenant environment with actually only one tenant. Now we wanted to split up the companies into different tenants, and that's exactly what we did. Which meant actually that we went from a staging database with 5 companies attached to a single service tier, the service tier which was set up as a single tenant. And as an end result, we ended up with a multi-tenant service with an application attached to it and 3 tenants with each its companies. This concludes my video about migration from single tenancy to multi-tenancy. I hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you next time.